I am Mary Liz Wright, and I am from the far eastern part of the state. I cover Clark, Crawford, and Edgar counties as a nutrition and wellness educator. My co-presenter today is Lisa Peterson.
Yeah, thank you. And I cover Christian, Jersey, Macoupin, and Montgomery County, Illinois, in west central part of the state.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, here we go. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please hold your questions until the end, or feel free to type them in the chat box. We're going to be monitoring that. Also, do not feel like you need to take notes while we are speaking. You will be receiving a very comprehensive handout. In order to receive that handout that's chock full of information and recipes, you will need to complete the evaluation that you will receive via email at the end of this presentation. And again, a little housekeeping. The University of Illinois Extension never endorses any particular brand. So if you see a label on any of our pictures, or if I inadvertently use a brand name, please do not consider it an endorsement. All right, so the first appliance we're going to talk about today is the slow cooker. We all have them. They're the workhorse of the kitchen. I've had one for going on 35 years now and use it regularly. So what is a slow cooker? Well, it consists of two parts. Thankfully, the old ones didn't. If you all remember those older ones that the ceramic crock was fixed into the metal casing permanently, those were a booger to wash. But now they're two parts, a glazed ceramic inner crock housed in a metal casing that has a heating element in it. The lid is clear. The lid is clear for a reason, because it's that tight-fitting lid that allows condensation to form on the underside of that lid and then run down the sides, forming a water seal that aids in the retention of flavor and heat. If you lift the lid, it can drop the temperature 10 to 15 degrees, and it can add an additional 20 to 30 minutes of cooking time. So leave the lid on. Slow cookers come in many different sizes and shapes, ranging from 1 quart all the way up to an 8 quart. The size that you need to choose depends on what is your purpose for the slow cooker. Do you have a large family? Are you only wanting to use it for large parties? Are you thinking, oh, I just want to make some melted cheese or chocolate fondue? Well, you'll need to perhaps buy more than one kind. I think I have 4 at home. I'm almost ashamed to admit that. But you can purchase these at garage sales or thrift stores if you want more than one size to have in your pantry, and we'll address that purchasing from secondhand in a later slide. So features and designs, as I said, they've been around for a long time, and slow cookers have really advanced in their abilities. The settings are really indicative of how much control you have. The photo there on the right-hand side, that's more of the older model, or a less expensive model where you just choose low, high, or warm. Many of the slow cookers now are programmable. You can set it for a certain number of hours, knowing with great confidence that once that time period has been completed, the slow cooker will automatically shift itself to warm and continue to keep the food at a safe temperature. Now, the difference between high and low is really just the length of time it takes the internal temperature of your food to reach a safe level. So if you are wanting to use your slow cooker, you might want to consider preheating the crock before adding ingredients. And I also like to cook on high for the first hour or so while I'm getting ready in the morning, and then shift it to low for a more extended time. And that way I am ensuring that particularly the raw meat that I've put in the slow cooker will not be in that danger zone that could cause foodborne illness for any extended amount of time. We all have favorite uses. If you want to, go ahead and type some of your favorite uses for your slow cooker in the chat box, and we'll look at them as we review and move along. Soups and stews are great to cook in the slow cooker, and anything that lends itself to a long, slow cooking, like less tender cuts of meat. You can take a pretty tough piece of meat, use your slow cooker, and end up with a very acceptable product. Gentle heat is also something that they're famous for. So as a fondue pot, cooking rice in a slow cooker also is a good way to do it. Some folks like to use the slow cooker as a serving piece, or a hot holding, if you will. And if you have prepared the dish the day before and chilled it out in your refrigerator, in order to use then your slow cooker as a serving dish, you would want to heat that food to 165 degrees before placing it in your slow cooker. That is just a food safety measure. So cooking strategies. Again, quick start. You can chop up all your food, get your meat marinated, what have you, and place all of those items in the refrigerator the night before. However, you don't want to store them in the refrigerator in the crock because you don't want to put that very cold crock with cold food into your hot slow cooker. You might cause it to crack. You're also going to want to prepare it with some nonstick cooking spray. They also have commercially made slow cooker liners. I've used those slow cooker liners several times, and have found that if you're cooking beyond that 8-hour mark, or if your food is a little higher in fat, making a pulled pork, for instance, you might have some trouble with that liner sticking to your crock. So just beware of that. How we place food in the slow cooker depends on how quickly it will cook. Your more firm root vegetables need to go in the bottom and the sides, because that's where the heating element is. Then the meat on top of that, and the sauce then again on top of that. Your more delicate vegetables can be put in at a later time, or even in the last 30 minutes of cooking. So if you're using big pieces of meat, make sure they fit into your slow cooker. Trimming that piece of meat into 2 or 3 chunks will make it cook more efficiently. And remember, again, we want that lid to fit tightly in order for the slow cooker to do its job. Cooking strategies. Meats will cook very well and safely inside your slow cooker by just placing the raw meat in. However, some recipes, some people prefer to brown the meat first in order to impart more flavor in it and have it look the way we expect meat to look. So brown it in a different pan and then put it in your slow cooker. If you want to use pasta or rice, sometimes it's best to cook it, and beans as well. Cook them on top of the stove and then add them to your slow cooker. The pasta you're going to want to add only in the last 30 minutes of cooking. Beans tend to harden if they're cooked with acid or sugar. And so again, by pre-cooking the beans, you're going to have a much more satisfactory end product by placing them in the slow cooker. You can use your slow cooker to make dessert, and you can have very fine results with that, but just make sure you don't overbeat the batter. If you want to thicken foods, minute tapioca works best. Cornstarch, flour can cause clumping or inconsistent thickening. Delicate ingredients like our dairy products, putting sour cream or milk in, you're going to want to do that at the very last in order for it not to curdle. And then also, some seasonings will lose flavor in the long cooking process. So go ahead and make your recipe the way it's called with the seasonings, but then taste the food before you serve it, and you might want to readjust your seasoning just before serving. When we're cleaning our slow cooker, always turn it off, unplug it, pull the ceramic liner out, and let it cool off just a little bit. You don't want to plunge the stoneware into cold water, causing it to crack. Remember when I said it would be a good idea to buy an additional slow cooker, and you can get them at thrift stores or garage sales, but how do you know it's doing its job and it's keeping the food safe? Well, here's a little slow cooker safety test that you can do at home. Just follow these directions, and they're in your handout that you're going to get, so we don't need to write this down. So again, food safety tips. We're always about the food safety. Don't overload your crock. Don't put a great big roast in there and then put tin foil and jam the lid on top of that. That's not going to cook effectively, and it's really probably not going to be safe. So minimum of half full, maximum of 2/3 full. Again, a reason to have more than one size. When cooking meat or poultry, and I just saw a question come up in the chat box, cover with liquid such as water or stock, and then you'll be sure that the meat isn't going to dry out, and then also it won't be up in a cooler part of the slow cooker. It will always be in the hot liquid. Do not put frozen meat in the slow cooker. We know that the frozen meat will thaw and eventually cook, but the danger is how long will that meat be at a temperature where bacteria will want to thrive. So to be safe, make sure your meat is completely thawed before putting it in the slow cooker. And again, remember, do not lift that lid. The next appliance we're going to take out for a spin is called the spiralizer. And spiralizers are really fun. I still consider them new kitchen gadgets, but they've been around for a little while. They began as a means for vegans to enjoy pasta-like dishes, and they've crossed over into the mainstream because they are fun. In fact, our family's been using them for quite some time. We purchased our first spiralizer as a way to use up all that zucchini and summer squash from your garden. And it does a really fine job in doing that. Why spiralize? Well, because it can be fun. And we know that if things are fun, children are much more likely to participate. It's a great way for them to help out in the kitchen and a great way for them to eat more vegetables. It's budget friendly when using fruits and veggies in season. It's a way to find grain-free pasta. And in fact, I like to make what we call apple spaghetti, particularly if I have little people around. And so you take an apple and spiralize it, making those kind of long, curly, noodle-like pieces of apple. Mix it with low-fat vanilla yogurt, sprinkle it with cinnamon, and it is a super fun dish to make. It's also a good way to cut down on your food waste. You can spiralize parts of fruits and vegetables that you might ordinarily throw away, like the stems of broccoli or the cores of cabbage, that sort of thing. So it's really a fun way to eat fruits and veggies. And as I mentioned, these vegetables, not only will you be getting the bonus of vitamins, minerals, and fiber, but 1 cup of spiralized veggies are 300 less calories than a cup of regular pasta. 300 less calories. Wow. It's also budget friendly. We're seeing the prepared spiralized vegetables and fruits in stores now. Sometimes you can purchase them fresh or frozen. However, they're pretty pricey, $3 to $5 a pound. Many of them have had preservatives added. And so if you want to have spiralized vegetables, you want to make sure you know what you're eating, you might as well just make it yourself. There are 3 different types of spiralizers. The first and most simple, most economical, is the handheld. Kind of reminds me of a really big pencil sharpener. And this is the one that my family started out with. It's really inexpensive, easy to clean, easy to store. However, if you're using those firmer vegetables, it can be really hard on your wrist. And so if you want to make spiralized vegetables frequently, you might consider the next model, which we call the horizontal countertop. It's about the size of a shoebox. It has a hand crank on it. The different types of blades to make different shapes of noodles store right in the appliance itself. Easy to clean, easier to use on firm vegetables. What are the cons? Well, you have to store it, and as I said, it's about the size of a shoebox, and it's made of lightweight plastic and can have some stability issues. If you're super serious about spiralizing, you really like it, you might want to invest in an electric countertop. Easy to use, dishwasher safe, multiple blade options, tons of different ways to use them, and a really good appliance if you're going to be using this frequently. But it is an investment. So once you've spiralized, how are you going to use them? Well, you can use them raw in salads, or like the apple that I was sharing with you. You can boil them like pasta, but be very careful in timing. You're not going to want to boil them for the 9 to 10 minutes like you would regular pasta. Just boil them until they're just soft. I think they're best when sauteed in a little bit of oil or roasted in the oven under a high temp like other vegetables. You can store spiralized fruits and veggies in the refrigerator. Store them in water. They'll last for 3 or 4 days. You're going to want to change that water daily. If you would like to freeze them, then blanch them on a first, and then freeze them on a baking sheet so they don't clump together. Your blanching times can be found at the University of Georgia Food Preservation site, and would vary depending on the time, the type of vegetable. So what freezes best? Well, your more firm vegetables like sweet potatoes, butternut squash, beets, carrots. What don't freeze very well is those summer squashes that are have a high water content anyway. So just make sure that you don't overcook them, and I think that you'll find that to be a very enjoyable side dish. All right, Lisa, what are you going to talk about?
Thank you, Mary Liz. So I'm going to be going through the air fryer as well as the electric pressure cookers. So again, we're going over the very basics on using these two devices or two appliances. So starting out, air is the new oil. There we go. So air fryers were first released in September of 2010 by Philips with the premise of rapid air technology in both Europe and Australia before making their way to the North American market. So about 4 million are sold per year with dozens of different makes and models. And I swear every time I turn around, there's somebody who has a new one I've never heard of before. But today, like I said, we're focusing on the basic air fryer here. So looking at what it does and following with its name, an air fryer is typically used to cook food that is traditionally fried. It works by circulating hot air that contains fine droplets around the food. The heating element is typically above the food, and a fan moves that air around. Air fryers operate at a high speed and cook faster than an oven. So French fries are ready in less than 10 minutes, and cakes can be baked in as little as 25 minutes, so very quickly. So no big surprise here, but research shows the most popular food in an air fryer is French fries. But they're not the only food. So vegetables can be quickly roasted in an air fryer, as well as cooking meat and fish and desserts. This is also a great opportunity to try your hand at making your own chips. So for example, taking fresh kale, drizzling it with a little bit of oil, and the chips are honestly ready in less than 5 minutes. So these are also great for reheating, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit later here in this section. So going a little bit into the health benefits. So although air fryers may be a better alternative to deep frying, using up to 85% less oil, limiting your intake of fried foods altogether is still the best option when it comes to your health. So dessert dishes made in an air fryer are still high in sugar and low in nutrients. So should be still used as an occasional treat. For foolproof meal planning, we'll still suggest you go to My Plate, trying to make half your plate those fruits and vegetables, focusing on whole grains, lean proteins, and low-fat dairy. Alrighty, for those of you who don't have an air fryer, I'm gonna go over a little bit on the guide to purchasing one. So most air fryers, the one thing to really cover is they're not designed to feed a lot of people. So taking the time to think about how many people are gonna be using this appliance, or how many people are you feeding with this appliance, is important. So a 3-quart air fryer is best for about 2 people, while a 4 to 6 quart can feed about 4 people. I've seen actually newer ones on the market now that go up to about a 16 quart, but typically the average one you're gonna see is roughly about 4 to 6 quart. Also, cost can play a huge role in these air fryers. So the more function it has, usually the more expensive it is. So prices range anywhere from $40 all the way up to $300. Another thing to think about with an air fryer, I know it's a big something new on the market, is how often are you already eating fried food? If it's something you don't eat very often, I mean, that's something to think about. Is it something that's gonna collect dust in the back of the pantry after you buy it? That's one thing we're trying to cut down on. So really taking that time, how often am I gonna be using it, is a big part of this as well. So I talked a little bit about the popular foods in these air fryers, so I wanna hit the other side of it, the less successful foods in an air fryer. So grains, what I mean by the grain is rice and pasta. So it's really nice to crisp up rice in them, but you should cook them on a stovetop first before you move them over to an air fryer. So the temperature of an air fryer never gets the machine hot enough to boil the water to cook the grains. So leafy greens, and again, I use that word light because there is a lot of air going on in that air fryer. They can make more of a mess in there. So the exception to this is if you're going to use a light leafy green, you might want to weigh it down with a little bit of oil. So that way it's not flying into your heating element and causing a ton of smoke coming out of it. Fresh cheeses. So fresh cheeses lead to melting in your air fryer. If you really want to do you love fried cheese curds, one option is to freeze them before putting them in an air fryer, and that'll help with the melting issue. And the other thing that's less successful when we talk about air fryers is liquid batters. So liquid batters tend to go flying the minute they hit those air fryers. And that means you might have some issues making breaded cod, chicken, or pork chops, unless you have an air fryer specific recipe for that. So keep that in mind. The liquid, it's gonna go flying in that air fryer. So these are just a few additional tips. So starting out there, adding water to the drawer of your air fryer if that food is really high in fat. So foods with a lot of fat will melt and drip, and that fat in there will drip, which may cause more smoke to come out of the machine. So adding water can help reduce some of that smoke in there. Flipping food or shaking is a great option. It's actually recommended by a lot of people who use air fryers, as well as the companies and manufacturers, mainly because that helps with even cooking, and especially if your food is overlapping. And it depends on the brand, and you always want to check in your manufacturer, but typically you don't have to stop your timer, take it out and shake it, because it's usually out for less than 30 seconds, but always check with your manufacturer on that one. So another one is if you want to add herbs and spices. I know we're trying to cut down on some of that salt we're eating. Herbs and spices are a great thing to add, but you don't want to add them directly to the food once they're in the fryer, because again, they're going to go flying. So one way to do that is to weigh them down with a little bit of oil. And it's okay to use a higher quality oil when we're working with our air fryers, because that temperature in there doesn't reach a high enough smoke point to cause them to degrade. That's something to keep in mind. All right, so additional mistakes to avoid. So there's dials, or there's a digital screen on there for a reason, so we definitely want to pay attention to them, but preheating can help. So taking the time, our general rule of thumb when we teach this class is usually about 3 minutes for a preheating time before putting your food in for the timer. So preheating the air fryer is best for optimum cooking. The temperature and airflow will be at the right levels, so you'll get a nice crisp food coming out of it. Making sure we're giving our food room to breathe. If we put too much in there, which when we're starting out using them, we tend to run into that. We'll put a lot of food in there, and you'll get a lot of uneven cooking. So we're trying to cut down on too many layers inside that basket. That can either lead to burnt food, or it can lead to really soggy, undercooked food. So when some recipes don't use any oil, most do, and it's still significantly less than oils used in a standard fried recipe. So you really only need about 1 to 2 teaspoons for most recipes and about 1 to 2 tablespoons for breaded recipes of oil. But of course, don't go too crazy with your oil. Again, if there's too much oil in there, you might drip it down into that bottom tray, which will lead to excess burning and smoke in there as well. Alrighty, avoiding these cooking conundrums. So do not flip your food out of the fryer with the drawer attached. I teach quite a bit of the in-person classes where we're actually practicing using these. And this has happened a few times where we'll do sliders, mini sliders in them, and they'll take the drawer out all excited and they'll flip it over. So all those juices that had now been air fried off my burger are now all on my burger again. So one suggestion is to get tongs out and take them out slowly, or get a spatula and take things out so all the juices and the stuff that fell to the bottom doesn't end up all over our food again. You do want to make sure you clean after every use to avoid contamination. So think of cooking raw chicken in it one day and then fries the next. You could potentially get sick from those fries. Additionally, all those juices that have now dried up in there, if you don't clean it, is the next time you use it are going to burn off, and you might have bad smells and kind of off flavors in the kitchen. And this one, the last one here, reheating your food, is actually what I use my air fryer for the most. So this is really nice for reheating leftovers from a restaurant. So it helps crisp up food really nicely again. One suggestion is preheating your air fryer to about 350 degrees. And again, I let it preheat for roughly about 3 minutes, and then starting point of about 5 minutes for timing, and then checking on it. And you always want to make sure you get your leftovers to 165 degrees. Alrighty, because there's all these different types of brands of air fryers, we do have some, you always want to follow your manufacturer's instructions for cleaning. These are just some general recommendations when we talk about it. So removing that basket and cleaning in hot soapy water with a sponge or brush. Wipe that exterior with a kitchen towel. You can use a hard bristle brush on the cooled heating element. If you ever see black smoke coming out of your air fryer, that's typically because something is stuck in that heating element. So always get in there and take a gander at it once it's cooled down and see if anything's stuck in there. You can always speed up that cleaning process as well by putting parchment paper down on the bottom. And we've done that before a lot when we do, especially sliders. It makes it really easy to clean up, to just take out that paper, and you don't have to sit there and try to scrub it out of the bottom. Yeah. So these are just a few considerations to think about when you buy an air fryer. Of course, they are a little bulky as we talk about the electric pressure cooker next. They do take up a lot of space. So thinking about, where am I going to store this? Do I want it to have space in my pantry? Do I want it sitting out? If you do cook things, you always want to be, especially when you first get these, is watch your cooking time. Foods that cook fast, like kale, broccoli, cauliflower, they also burn really quickly. So be very aware when you're starting out using it that you're checking on that food just to make sure. And just a friendly reminder, this is not a free ride for breaded and fried foods, but just kind of a lighter alternative. So again, making half your plate those fruits and vegetables and enjoying those sweets and fried food in moderation is still recommended. Remember, when you're looking at buying an air fryer, the size of it, that's the other big thing to watch. So if you have a family of 6, you maybe want to look at getting a bigger air fryer. Alrighty, so now we're moving on to these EPCs, or electric pressure cookers. So electric pressure cookers have evolved substantially since they were first patented in January of 1991. There's currently 3 generations of these on the market. The first generation, we really don't see a lot in the United States. It's more in Asia for their very cost-conscious consumers over there. But probably the one everybody's the most familiar with is that brand name Instant Pot. And usually if you're talking about an air fryer or an electric pressure cooker, that's the first thing that comes to mind is an Instant Pot. And I compare it to a crock pot. A crock pot is essentially a slow cooker. An Instant Pot is essentially, one of its features, the multi-cooker, with one of the main features being that electric pressure cooker. But these actually came out in 2009, that Instant Pot brand did. It was one of the first to hit North America. They've gained a lot of popularity. For example, in 2010, they sold about 300,000 of them. And between 2015 and 18, they sold roughly 5 million of them. And the Instant Pot actually set a record on Amazon Prime Day in 2018 by selling 300,000 of those pots in 36 hours, which is crazy. All right, so let's talk about these electric pressure cookers. So the difference in appliances. So thinking about what appliance best fits your needs and your budget. So if you are looking at wanting to can, so make sure you are purchasing a pressure canner, not a pressure cooker. You might hear these terms interchangeably, but they do serve different purposes. A canner is designed for preserving low acid foods, so things like meats and vegetables, and maintain a consistent temperature to destroy those harmful bacteria, those botulism spores that tend to pop up on us when we can, or we're trying to prevent when we can. The best way to use these, again, so if you're using a pressure canner, it maintains a consistent temperature. It's used mainly for canning. Now, an electric pressure cooker, the way these work is there's a tightly sealed lid that contains the steam that is generated from the liquid inside that cooker that heats up. This increases the pressure inside that cooker, which in turn increases the temperature. So the reason food cooks more quickly is because that higher temperature can be achieved inside that cooker compared to doing it on a non-pressurized pot. So multi-cookers and electric pressure cookers do not maintain a consistent temperature for a long enough time. So food in a jar, if you try to do that, you're not maintaining a safe temperature long enough for it to kill those botulism spores. Using electric pressure cookers for canning is not recommended by the USDA, so the United States Department of Agriculture, or the National Center for Home Food Preservation. Alrighty, so talking about these multi-cookers. So these are the kitchen workhorses with so many different functions on them. This may be where you think, well, what do I really need? So like I said earlier when we talked about the air fryer, the more things it has or more features it has, probably the more expensive it's going to be. So if all you're really looking for is an electric pressure cooker, you probably don't need the yogurt setting or the sterilized setting or the cake maker setting. So really thinking about what are my needs when it comes to these cookers. And the other thing to really think about with them is what size do you need? So there's 3 main sizes of these right now on the market. So the 3-quart, which are sometimes called the minis, do about 1 serving or feed about 1 to 2 people. They're very small. Probably the most common ones we're seeing on the market are the 6-quart, and those feed between 4 to 6 people. And again, those are pretty much the traditional ones you're seeing. And the biggest one that we have out right now is the 6 to 8. They feed about 6 to 8 people, and that's the 8-quart electric pressure cooker or multi-cooker. Alrighty, so let's talk a little bit about using these electric pressure cookers. One of the biggest pros of them is their quick cooking. So the temperature of the liquid inside that pressure cooker reaches somewhere above 244 to 250 degrees, which is well above boiling point, meaning again that cooking is a lot faster. Food cooks in about 1/4 to 1/3 less time. So dried beans cook in about 30 to 45 minutes compared to a stovetop where it can take many hours. Additionally, large cuts of meat cook in less than an hour and stay really nice and tender. Another big part of it is the flavor. So flavor is very concentrated in an electric pressure cooker, which is also great for those who have high blood pressure and are trying to find ways to cut down all that saltiness. Using herbs in one of these cookers brings out a lot of bold flavor and dynamic flavor where you don't miss that extra salt quite as much. These cookers are very safe and efficient, so the lids are interlocking, meaning you no longer fear of building up too much pressure inside the pot to force that lid off. Every time I teach this in person, there's always somebody who has a scar from accidentally hitting the pressure cooker when they were younger, or they tell me a story about how the lid flew off the top of their, or the roof of their house flew off because they accidentally hit it on the counter. So that's one thing. We're trying to get people away from the scariness of these pressure cookers. Additionally, all these cookers now come equipped with a backup vent or an overpressure plug that release excess pressure in case you forget to turn down the heat after the pot reaches full pressure. Or if that main vent, which we're going to talk about the anatomy next of these cookers, if that main vent gets clogged or when the food is cooking. There's also an expanded rubber gasket sitting on the inside. It's also called the sealing ring. So it's impossible to unlock and remove the lid until that pressure inside that cooker has been released, which is again another safety feature of them. When we talk about energy efficiency, the American Council for Energy Efficiency Economy found that pressure cookers use 50 to 75% less energy due to their shorter cooking time. And of course, the variety. They offer a lot of different features and what you can do with them. Just remember, it is a moist heat. So cooking soups, stews, dried beans, or any dish you like to simmer or braise usually work the best for when we talk about pressure cooking with them. These are also an energy and a time saver, similar to when Mary Liz talked about those slow cookers. They're a great one where you can throw all your ingredients into a pot and food is ready in less than an hour. All right, so let's briefly talk a little bit about the cons. Again, like the air fryer, they are a little bit bulky. So keeping in mind, where am I gonna store it? And they're big guys. So luckily they've made them a little more pretty over time, but that's something to think about. Do I have the space for this? And cost is another big con. They range somewhere between $50 to about $300, depending on, again, all the different features or how big of one you buy. Initial education, there's a lot of buttons on these guys. So this is where hopefully why a lot of you are joining us today is we're trying to help you with this area, trying to understand these cookers a little bit better and make you feel a little bit more confident about using them. The other big con is you can't check on your food. You can't taste test for seasoning, test for doneness, and make adjustments as needed. So if you check on it, you're either going to ruin the dish, delay the cooking, or have to start over again. So that is kind of a con. Got to put your faith in your cooker. Alrighty, so now I'm going to do a very general breakdown of one of these electric pressure cookers. Again, everyone is a little bit different. So if you're like, that doesn't look like mine, that's because there's so many different varieties of these. So I'm going to go over kind of a general overview of what the basics of these electric pressure cookers are. So starting out in the center, the heating element, that's also called the base or the heating unit or the cooking housing unit. This is the electrical part of your pressure cooker. This should never go into water because again, it's the electrical side. So keep that in mind, and I'll talk about cleaning all of this at the end. Inner pot, so that's the one in that corner there up top. So the inner pot fits inside the base. Typically it's either stainless steel or ceramic. It's really nice for removing, for washing. It is essential for cooking. Rest in peace to one of my, we do hands-on classes with these as well. And somebody wasn't paying attention and they ended up dumping their food into a heating element without that inner pot. You have to have that inner pot in there. Otherwise, it just won't work correctly, and that's a good way to ruin your pressure cooker. So that inner pot as well, one suggestion I've given to people is if you take that inner pot out to whatever you're doing with it, put a mat or a lid or a wooden spoon over the heating element. So that way you don't accidentally pour liquid directly into that heating element. And again, I'm going to cover cleaning that as well near the end. Alrighty, so the other side of that is that silicone inner ring. So this is on the lid, or it's inserted inside the lid of the electric pressure cooker and helps seal in the pressure. So it is recommended, and this is by the Instant Pot brand, to replace this every 18 to 24 months as they do stretch over time with continuous use. One thing else to consider with these is you want to clean them after every use. So whether you're hand washing or whatever your manufacturer tells you what to do, I know quite a few of these are dishwasher safe. My other suggestion for these is to have a few of them. So the silicone inner ring, you do want to have a couple, mainly because say you celebrated Cinco de Mayo yesterday and you made taco soup in your cooker, and today you decide you want to make cheesecake. Well, your cheesecake may end up with a little bit of a spicy flavor to it because of that ring. So that ring absorbs flavor really well. So it's good to have one that's for sweet foods and one that's more for savory foods, just keeping that in mind. The other thing is if you start working with your cooker and you turn on and you start seeing steam pouring out the sides, there's a good chance it's because that silicone ring isn't in there correctly or it isn't in there at all. So that's one little troubleshooting activity you can do there. All right, so moving on down there, talking about the floating valve and the anti-block shield. So that shield, that one on the bottom there, prevents food from getting trapped in the steam release pipe and assists with our pressure regulation. So to get the anti-lock shield is underneath the lid and should be removed and cleaned after each use, especially following the preparation of foods that may have splattered. So to remove, this is where it gets a little tricky. And when I'm in person in class, I have about 5 or 6 of these lids and have everybody try to get off the shield. So what you have to do is take your thumb and pinch it together and pull it up. It does take a little bit of work, but I promise it comes off. Double check with your manufacturer too, just to double check. But the anti-block shield helps prevent any issues with it coming to pressure. So next to it is our floating valve. So that floating valve, again, this is the inside of our lid. So this is the thing that's going to pop up and seal cooker when the pressure is sufficient. So once that floating valve pops up, the silicone ring seals the pressure cooker, and the pin on the floating valve serves as a lock, preventing the lid from being opened before the pressure has been released. So that's one of the really nice things about this. If you look on that next image over, where you can see that floating valve, if that guy is up, so the little pin in there, and it's different colors, it's different shapes, it depends on your cooker, what it looks like. If that one is up, that means your pressure cooker is sealed and you cannot open it. So if that thing is up, it's sealed. You don't want to touch it. Alrighty. So the one in front of that is the pressure release handle. This typically has two settings. That is the sealing and the venting. When you get all your ingredients in there and you put your lid on, set the handle to seal or sealing. If you forget to, you're going to see a bunch of steam coming out that top. So you want to make sure when you start cooking that that is set on seal, not vent. And we're going to talk about in a little bit the difference between a quick release and a natural release, and that's the handle you're going to push to release it. Alrighty, and then the way top there, where you see all those little holes, this is where the steam comes out. You never want to have your face or your hands over this, or you'll have a very hot, unwanted facial. So due to the amount of steam that comes out of this top area, try to avoid having your cooker under a cabinet to prevent any condensation from building up. Or I know there's steam release diverters you can buy, which are kind of nice, and they shoot your steam another direction. But again, make sure you buy one that fits your cooker, because it depends on what version you have, will also depend on what kind of diverter you should get for it. So check with your manufacturers on that as well. But those are nice for pushing your steam a different direction so it's not going straight up. Yeah, something to keep in mind. Alrighty, so understanding the settings. So each panel, of course, looks very, very different when we talk about the settings of these cookers. So under the pressure setting column, again, you may see these, you may not, depends on your cooker. Usually there's a high, low, and normal. I have a couple of cookers that don't have a screen like this, and that's fine. So that's what I'm trying to go through, just a lot of the general stuff on this side of it. So a high pressure, if it's under a high pressure, that indicates that it's cooking somewhere around 244 to 250 degrees. The lid is sealed to keep the pressure trapped. If it's on a low pressure setting, that's usually about 233 degrees. If you're cooking rice, that's where it's automatically going to go, is that low pressure setting on there. And then normal, again, it's going to depend on the cooker. This one is an Instant Pot version of it. And if it goes to a normal, that usually means it's on a slow cooker setting. So things to keep in mind with these cookers. And the other thing I did want to hit on this slide is the warm setting. So a lot of these these electric pressure cookers have a setting that'll automatically, once your cooking is done, will go switch right over to a warm setting. So this is really nice. A lot of cookers, it'll go to a warm and you need to turn it off or unplug it to end the warm setting. But say you're running around the house and the cooker goes off, so you hit your timer, it's already going to start to naturally release pressure, but then it's going to start counting up time. So it's going to tell you how long it's been sitting on a keep warm setting. And every cooker is different for how long it'll sit on it. Some are 10 hours. I've seen some that will say 24 hours it'll sit on it, but it keeps your food warm, which is kind of a nice feature there. Alrighty, and the other thing with this one is when we talk about this screen, the appliance isn't going to start timing until you actually reach the pressure level. So this is something that's often deceiving when we talk about these electric pressure cookers. They tell you, oh yeah, it's going to be ready in 10 minutes. Well, you got to keep in mind that it takes it could take up to 20 minutes for it to actually reach pressure before it starts timing. So this is something to keep in mind when you buy one of these. Just because your cook time is 10 minutes, you have to account for the amount of time it takes for it to get to up to pressure and then coming down from pressure, which leads me to talking about the releases of pressure here. So quick release, it's often called a QR. This prevents overcooking. This is where you manually turn that steam release valve that I showed a few slides ago to the venting position. So you're going to hear that timer go off and you automatically switch your release over to a quick release by going from seal to a vent. And this is what's going to cool the cooker down a lot faster. It takes a few minutes. I say 1 to 2, but if you're doing things with a lot of liquid, that can take up to about 10. I know when I do soups, it takes roughly about 10 to 15 minutes for it to come down, for my pin to actually drop. 10 would be on the high end. But again, it depends how much food's in there. But this is really nice for delicate foods like broccoli, corn, or bok choy in there. A natural release, this is where you're not switching it over from a quick release. So a natural release, or an NR, is you let your cooker naturally come down from pressure. This can take anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes when we talk about it. Depends how much liquid's in there. Recipes, of course, with more liquid will take more time to come down. The natural release lets food stay intact during the depressurization process, as there's less movement within the appliance. Anything that's really foamy or dishes that have a lot of liquid are best left for a natural release method, just to prevent anything from getting stuck in there. And there's been times where I'll be teaching this in class and we'll be watching our clock. We're running a little short on time. And so I'll do a quick release. Well, if you see a fountain coming out the top with a bunch of liquid, it might be smarter to switch back over to a natural release. Give it a few more minutes, which leads me into that last one there, that combination. So I have an NR10 as an example. So that's your natural releasing for 10 minutes, and then you switch over to a quick release. So that would be for your stews, your chilies, and your combination meals. And again, anytime you're releasing, I know a lot of people get nervous about the release. You can always use a spoon or something, or I know some people put towels over them to release. So you're a little bit less timid about switching it over to a quick release. All right, so your final step here is taking off the lid. So when we do this, of course, you want to wait for that pin to drop. That floating valve should have dropped. It should not be straight up anymore. When you do it, be very, very cautious. This is often where I see people getting hurt, is you want to make sure that you're very careful when you take off that lid. One suggestion is wearing oven mitts when you turn to take off the lid, and you always want to open it away from you. This is, again, where we get that really unwanted facial from all that heat. So trying to open it on the away, not towards you. Okay, so some of the best tips we can give, or best results for electric pressure cooking. So cutting food the same size. So again, that's consistency, making sure everything's cooking evenly, nothing's getting undercooked. Just a reminder, if you're trying to meal plan or schedule, try to keep that preheating time in mind, so you know that it's going to take an additional 30 to 45 minutes for it to come up to pressure and come back down from pressure. Play around with all your settings, the automatic settings on there. This is great to use if you have something that you don't have a specific recipe for the pressure cooking. So if you have a soup and you honestly just want to try it in a pressure cooker when you usually make it stovetop, this is where the electric or the automatic settings can be really helpful. And I know eggs are always a really popular one. I know we give you a recipe for hard boiling eggs. That's something a lot of people around my area love to do with their pressure cookers. Another thing to keep in mind is you need to have some type of liquid when you're cooking with these. So a lot of times if you don't have enough liquid, what might happen is that screen will come up saying burn. Don't panic, it's happened to me many, many times. Usually that means there wasn't enough liquid in that cooker. So one suggestion would be canceling and then adding more liquid. But you usually want somewhere between a half a cup to 1 cup of liquid in that cooker. Alrighty. So working with hot liquids, this came up in a class probably last year at some point. Somebody asked me what happens if I put hot liquid into my pressure cooker. Will it make the cooker reach pressure faster? And it will. If you add hot liquid to a pressure cooker that's cold, you will get to pressure faster, but follow your recipe. If the recipe calls for hot liquid, that's fine, but this might end up with your other food being undercooked if you're doing it in a recipe that doesn't call for hot liquid. Soaking dry beans. Just want to hit a little bit on beans. So dried beans double in volume and weight after soaking or cooking. So to avoid this overflow, do not fill past the half mark to allow for expansion. So when cooking beans, use about a sufficient enough liquid to cover the beans. And although it isn't necessary, you can still speed up that cooking process by soaking those beans before you actually put them into the cooker. But yeah, just things to keep in mind. And then a little bit on the pasta there. So pressure cooking pasta noodles, the one thing that happens if you mix in pasta noodles too deep in that cooker is they tend to end up really mushy. So choosing dry noodles with a minimum of 8 minutes of cooking time. That would normally cook for at least 8 minutes. That means they're gonna be sturdy enough in your pressure cooker. We do a lot of soups with them, like chicken noodle soup and things like that. And those, what you do is you put the noodles on top and then you just lightly push them into that liquid. So you're not mixing them in, you're just submerging them just slightly before you start cooking. And those have held up okay, usually. All right, he's talking a little bit about some of our food safety with this. So you always want to leave these unplugged when you're not using them. We say that with all your appliances. Additionally, when we talk about them, is you do not want to thaw food in. Mary Liz already kind of hit on this. We don't want to leave food out at room temperature to thaw. That's even in a cold appliance. That's still not a safe practice. Do not leave unattended. What I basically mean by that is don't put all your food in there and decide to drive an hour away some way. So make sure you are around in case something does go wrong or it beeps at you, you're present, and you know what to do and how to take care of the problem if something does go wrong in there. You can see my image there that shows a little bit more information on cooking. So they have a max line on there. And like I said, if you're cooking things like beans, you don't want to go any more higher than that half full, mainly because of that foaming, and with dried veggies, that also happens in grains. So again, the half full line. Other foods that may have a lot of foaming in them would be things like applesauce, cranberries, pearl barley, oatmeal. Again, no more than half full. Generally speaking, when you're cooking or doing pressure cooking in these, you don't want to go past the 2/3 full line. So that max line is not meant for pressure cooking. And of course, because I'm always curious, what's going to happen if I go to the max line? I've done that before with soups. I had a huge mess in my kitchen. It came out the sides, it came out the top, it was coming out everywhere. So definitely don't go past that 2/3 full max or full line when we talk about using these. The other thing, and again, we're talking about specifically these electric pressure cookers. They are not designed to fry food in. So commercially, when those who do use pressure frying, they're at about 5 PSI. Well, these cookers are somewhere between 10 and 11 PSI. So you may actually end up melting the sealing ring by trying to fry in these. So that's, again, one general recommendation. Always follow your manufacturers, but kind of shows why we tell you not to do that. Okay, so don't forget that thermometer. Just because that meat is in there, you still need your thermometer. So you want to make sure your meat is being cooked to the correct temperature. So if you put chicken in there, don't just count on it being done when it comes out. Put that thermometer in there and make sure it does get to 165. And keep your food in the refrigerator until you're ready to cook with it. Kind of leading into that, you do want to watch the delayed cooking settings here. So it is okay, unlike we talked about with the slow cookers, it is okay to put frozen meat in a pressure cooker. Again, it's just going to take a little bit longer for it to get to pressure because it needs to make up for that coldness of that meat. But watch that delayed setting. Delayed settings are not good for perishable foods because, again, with foodborne illness, we can't see it, we can't smell it, and we can't taste it. So if that food's been sitting out there, you decide at 9 a.m. you're going to throw all your food in there and you're actually going to cook it, delay it for 6 to 7 hours, that food is now producing harmful bacteria and could make you sick. All right, so ending everything out here, talking about cleaning and care. Again, always follow your manufacturer's instructions for proper cleaning. Just gonna hit on a couple little tips and tricks here. So to get in the nooks and crannies of the heating element, so near the handles, there's often little spots where it's really hard to clean. One suggestion I've given to people is using those foam brushes, and I've got a picture of it up there too, and dipping that into hot soapy water and getting in between to get as much out as you can and to clean it really well. That inner pot, like I said, should be washed after every use. So the inner pot and the steam rack are made of sturdy food grade stainless steel for the most part and dishwasher safe, but again, depends on your manufacturers on that. But what you might notice, what happens with stainless steel is it tends to get those hard water lines or hard water stains in there. And one trick that really helps with getting rid of that rainbow effect or that discoloration is using a little bit of white vinegar in there or lemon juice. And I've done it many times with all of our cookers, and it does come out really nicely. So that's one suggestion there. Make sure you are using a non-abrasive stainless steel cleaner if you're using a stainless steel cleaner. The steam release valve and the float valve should be cleaned and wiped of any food particles every time you're using them. That is safety-wise. Same with that anti-block shield. I talked about that earlier. Hand wash it, wipe with a soft cloth and dry completely. And those sealing rings, clean them after every use and make sure they are completely dry before you come back in there. It's not necessary to wash the lid of that pot after every use, but you want to make sure you do wipe it down in between just to make sure you do get anything that might get stuck on there. All right, so this leads us to the end of our presentation today. So thank you for listening. Mary Liz, we got any questions?
We sure do, Lisa. I just want to thank everyone for typing in the chat box. We have some really good questions. I also appreciated the sharing of how you use your slow cooker, or there's also some really good sharing going on with the electric pressure cooker. So to get right to the questions, I've heard if you warm up your cooker, you should put a cup of liquid in the bottom. Well, that would probably be a good idea, although not absolutely true, not absolutely necessary. The next one, how do you tell if a crack in the crock is just in the glaze or all the way through? Well, I will tell you from a food safety standpoint, anytime we have a crack in any kind of china or ceramic, bacteria could be harbored inside that crack. And so unfortunately, I'm going to suggest that you get rid of that. You can probably purchase a new crock by going online with the manufacturer, or get a new one. So just from a food safety standpoint. And then Lisa, the next few questions are for you. So I think you have answered some of these in the body of the work. I'm just glancing over these now.
Sure.
Some people prefer the stovetop method.
Yep.
They don't have an Instapot, but is it sometimes it can be the same as from a time standpoint, yes. And so what they're talking about is that buildup of steam.
Yep.
Okay, how about, can I just stick some meat and veggies in the Instapot like the slow cooker, or do I need to follow a specific recipe?
So if you're going to use the Instant Pot or an electric pressure cooker for that, again, you got to make sure there's liquid in there. The Instant Pot does have a slow cooker setting. Again, depends on what kind of cooker you have. They do have a setting for it. But just remember, we do give you, I believe in the handout, some information about changing your recipes. So going from a slow cooker to an Instant Pot or an electric pressure cooker as well. Just make sure you do have liquid in there. And again, if you don't have a recipe, try those automatic settings. That's always a good option. What do you think, Mary Liz?
I think that's an excellent idea. And again, converting traditional oven to Instapot or to electric pressure cooker, I believe that we've got a chart in the handout, don't we?
Yeah. Yep, I believe we do too. Yep.
Okay. One more question is someone who's trying to watch what they're eating and get a little more nutritious diet. What would we suggest, the air fryer or the electric pressure cooker? What do you think, Lisa?
That's a good question. Honestly, it's kind of looking at your own diet. So what are you eating currently? I mean, again, with those air fryers, if you already eat a lot of fried food, this might be a good alternative for that. The pressure cookers are a little different. They have different features, but again, it looks at what are your personal needs when we talk about them. So if you love soups, I know that was one of my big kickers when I got an electric pressure cooker. I love making soup, and that's one of the fantastic features of these pressure cookers. Yeah, so it just depends on what you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like that's about it. Just making sure that we have some cleaning comments on there. That's good. You can find additional resources. We're on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook. Lisa is an Instagram queen. So look for us out there. We're always trying to share that good research-based information from our land-grant university, which is the University of Illinois in our case. So please look to those resources. We also have another opportunity for you to receive information from us. You can sign up for wellness tips, and they're on nutrition, finances, family life issues. We promise we won't send more than 2 texts each week. We will not share your phone number with anyone, and you can discontinue at any time. So if you'd like to sign up, go to go.illinois.edu/wellness tips. And join us again, not Lisa and I, there'll be other folks presenting our next Health at Home webinar, and it will be about diabetes, self-care during difficult times. again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm continuing to read the chat. We appreciate your thanks, and we hope that you learned a little something. Please fill out the evaluation when you get it, and then you will be receiving our very comprehensive handout full of recipes and good information. So again, thank you all. Lisa?
Yeah, thank you so much for listening in on with us today.
All righty, have a good afternoon.